Good morning. This is Preacher with Parrots. Some people know me as Pastor Barbara. God, I'm sure some people call me a lot of other names. Today is January 22nd, 2015, and it's 2:01 a.m. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, and the time has come when I need to do it. You say, why do I need to hurry up and do it now? Well, I have 3 broadcasts a week. At the present, on Sunday nights, well, it depends where you are. Sunday late afternoon if you're on the West Coast. Sunday nighttime, night, if you're on the East Coast in the United States. And if you're in Central Europe, it's pretty close to 4 in the morning. But my second broadcast on Sundays, at present, is in the book of Ephesians. As soon as we get through with Ephesians, we're going to be in the book of Romans. When we get to the book of Romans, first chapter, toward the end of the chapter, we're going to come to some words that say, it is an abomination for a man to lie with another man as a man lies with a woman. And that sounds like homosexuality. And by the way, Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 and Romans 1 are almost word for word identical. So this business about what the Old Testament says versus what the New Testament says doesn't really hold water, does it? However, I have heard so many people say things that are inaccurate. When I start talking to my viewers, and this is a live broadcast where my viewers interact with me, ask me questions, occasionally a comment. And I make videos also, and recently, in place of simulcasting, which I used to do, I've been broadcasting live to one group at the same time I'm making a video for you all. When I get to that subject, which is very delicate, a subject that you say the word and it's already misunderstood, it's already accusatory, it's already sensitive, and already very misunderstood. And when I get to it, I want to be understood. I always want to be understood. But especially in a subject that is so delicate, I want everybody to be on the same page I'm on. I want us all to talk the same language. And if I say the word homosexual, I want what comes out of my mouth to be the same thing that goes into your understanding. Let me give you an example. For many years, I was a court interpreter. Now, most of you have heard that it's one thing to translate a word. It's another thing to translate a thought or an idea, and that's very true. So people have the idea that every word in English has a word in another language, and that's not so. Sometimes, say one word in English requires a sentence or even a paragraph in another language. I remember I went to a deposition one time. Whenever I was called to go do something at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday, I knew somebody had been there at 8 o'clock in the morning and it wasn't working out. They needed another interpreter. They had spent all morning trying to explain to the witness what consortium was. And it didn't work out. Attorney did his best. The interpreter did his best. The witness didn't understand. And I said, I can do it in paragraph. If you want me to interpret for you, that's what you've been doing and it hasn't been working. If you want me to tell the man what consortium is, loss of consortium, which according to his attorney, that's what he's suing for, but he doesn't know what it is, I'll tell him. Is that okay with you? Well, didn't even take 3 minutes. If you're talking the same language. I was interpreting a trial that had to do with an automobile accident, and a lot of money was involved. And the witness used the word camioneta. Depending on which Spanish-speaking country you're in, a camión is a large truck or a large bus. And depending on what country you're in, a camioneta can be a small truck or a small bus. And my witness used the word camioneta. I bought a camioneta in 1957. It was a Ford 57 station wagon. When I got to Central America, many, many years after that, I was driving a 3/4 ton pickup with a huge camper on it. It was also a camioneta. Visiting very close friends, almost like family in Tijuana, I noticed that they referred to the bus that went from one colonia to another as a camioneta. A van is a camioneta. I said to the judge, I did exactly what the law requires I do. And I said, Your Honor, may I inquire? In parentheses, I would have said, is this something you were riding in? Were boxes being carried in it? How big is it? How long is it? Does it require a special license to drive it? I could have said, it's a van. What if I just, out of all the options, I said it's a van? And it went into the record that my witness said van. Because if I said it, that's representative of what my witness said. Suppose somebody else would have come along and been talking about a pickup. If the record says that one man said it's a van and another man says it's a pickup, somebody's lying. No, 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 no. is that some words have more than one meaning, or they may have one meaning for one person and one for another person. And if you're not talking the same language, especially about something so important that God calls it an abomination, we need to talk the same language. Most people, I think, that I have talked to, when the word homosexual is said, just that word, what's the mental picture they get? The mental picture they get is one man having sex with another man. Is that the mental picture you get? Is that what you think a homosexual is? Or one woman having sex with another woman? Is that what you believe a homosexual is? It's not. What I just described, the correct word, and you realize that I have to be specific, both as a teacher, as a preacher talking about something that God calls an abomination. I better know what I'm talking about. What I just described is not a homosexual. What I just described is a homosexual act. A man lying with a man as a man lies with a woman is a homosexual act. Do you call the people involved homosexuals if they're doing a homosexual act? Not necessarily. There are homosexuals who have never committed a homosexual act. And there are people committing homosexual acts who are not homosexual. I'll prove it to you in a short while. And by the way, I intend to bring in the future more information on this same subject. I can't do it all tonight. I'm doing just enough now to get my class, my viewers, my congregation via the internet prepared to talk the same language as I when I get to the first chapter of Romans. Well, you say, if a person committing a homosexual act isn't a homosexual, then what is a homosexual? I wish I had a book that I would like to refer to. It's called, Is It a Choice? I've had the book for a long time. I just happened to see it in a thrift store. I found that, educationally speaking, it was right on. Every word used was explained. The person was not for or against, at least in his writing of the book, but explained many of the things I'm going to tell you. But in addition, you're a big boy, a big girl. You know how to Google. You know how to research. Look the word up. You're not going to look at a educationally respected dictionary and find the word. A homosexual is a person who commits a homosexual act. It's not there. What are you going to find? What do people who are experts on the subject, what do they call? How do they define a homosexual? A homosexual is a person who has a preference. A person that if they're going to engage in the act, they would prefer to do it with somebody of the same sex. They have a desire, perhaps. Let's put it this way. If they have desire, they have desire to engage with the person of the same sex. It doesn't mean they're doing it. How old were you when you realized, let's say you're a male, and when you knew that one day you were going to grow up and marry a girl? How old were you when you had that same thought, that same desire, and that same preference? How did you see yourself when you grew up? Were you 12? Were you 10? Were you 8? There are children. Now, some children, their thought never occurs to them, but with so much going on in jokes, in comedy, in locker room talk, on television, there are small children who are aware of their sexuality. I can't tell you at what age. I can tell you I was a kid when I thought, when I grew up, I would marry a handsome man who would love me, who was kind. I would have babies. It didn't happen. I'm a heterosexual old maid in my 80s. But that would have been my preference, and I knew it when I was very young. Now, there are homosexuals. Oh, this is going to knock your socks off. There are homosexuals who have never engaged in any kind of sexual activity, period. I'm talking hugging, I'm talking kissing, I'm talking mental ideas. They are celibate. Oh, they have their preferences. If they were active, who they would be active with. But they have never been active. There are celibate homosexuals. There are celibate heterosexuals. So because somebody is homosexual, he may be totally pure as a driven snow. What makes a homosexual or a heterosexual is not what they're doing. It's what they would prefer. Let me give you an example of two heterosexuals engaging in homosexual activity. There's a name for it. In women's colleges, in men's jails. I'm not even going to mention the word military. There are people who are heterosexual. They may be married. They may have children. Let's say in a men's jail. You have people who are going to be in jail for their entire life, and they may have been sexually active before they went to jail. Definitely heterosexual. The term is gay for the stay. They would prefer to have the experience with somebody of the opposite sex, but that's not an option. They have absolutely no interest in being celibate, so they do what they consider second best. No way, Jose, are they homosexuals. They are heterosexuals engaging in homosexual activity. Let me see if I can think of another activity. I've got one for you. How about the Roman Catholic Church? Did you know that the Roman Catholic Church has ordained priests that they know to be gay? Why would they do that? They do that because to be ordained, the priest or the priest-to-be takes a vow of celibacy. He takes a vow to not engage in any kind of sexual activity. So a celibate priest doesn't make any difference. Because you see, the word homosexual means a person who, if they are active, prefer to be active with the same gender. But if one is going to be celibate, one is not going to engage in that activity. So it doesn't make any difference what your preference is. And let me tell you, you can get through life without your preference. I was very young in Detroit when the Second World War broke out. We had air raid sirens going off. We had air raids. But in addition, and we had our boys going off to war, and our girls becoming nurses, and Rosie the Riveter because Robert the Riveter was off serving his country. You know what our butter looked like? You go to a store because you wanted butter and you got a brick that was white. It looked like a hunk of lard. we preferred, our preference would have been butter. We got a hunk of white, hard stuff of the consistency of butter or lard, and a package of powder. You could, you had to soften it and wash your hands real good and mix it up to make it even the color of butter. Why? See, there were things like bananas. Oh, by the way, have you ever had a banana split? I did, all during World War II. I was 14 and had a driver's license for a couple of months or thereabout when the war ended. So I know all about wanting stuff you can't have. Bananas, coconuts, coffee, gasoline, all that stuff came from other countries. Not only did it come from other countries, it came from countries you can't drive to. You have to go by air or by sea. And during the Second World War, all of our boats and our planes were busy in the war, so we went without. Or it was severely rationed. You don't always get what you want. Sometimes you have to go without. You say, but this is what I want. This is my preference. Look, we've become very big in this country on what are my rights. If I'm this way, don't I have the same right as somebody who's different than me? We're even passing laws about things over which no laws should be passed. You say, well, if I'm this way, why shouldn't I? Can't I do it too? Should a homosexual have a right that a heterosexual doesn't have? You say, wait a minute, sister, you got that backwards. You mean, no. I know what I'm talking about. If you, and somebody came on my program, which now would have been last night, just a few hours ago, and said something about being gay. And I said, all right, from what you say, I presume you're telling me you're gay. And if you are, you want to talk about it, we can do that. And the answer that my viewer typed in was, pray for me. Let's talk about rights. There's a word in the Bible called fornication. What that word means is, it's like an umbrella. Every sin mentioned in the Bible that has anything to do with sex comes under that umbrella. Lying doesn't. Stealing doesn't. Hate doesn't. But premarital sex does. Adultery, where one or both are married, does. Homosexual acts do. Suppose a man is heterosexual. Well, suppose it's you. Let's make it personal. Let's get our feelings in here. Excuse me. We can talk very freely about other people's feelings. Let's talk about our own. Let's talk about yours. Suppose a man is heterosexual. he is married and deeply in love with a heterosexual woman who suffers a severe accident and is unable to participate. Think with compassion. Does this man, because he is heterosexual and his preference is to be with a homosexual woman, does he have the right to engage his heterosexual female neighbor? Well, wait a minute. He has a preference. Many of them say, well, I have needs. Does he have the right to engage somebody he's not married to, who is married to somebody else because he's a heterosexual? So he has the right to engage in the act. So then why should a homosexual who prefers the same gender be granted rights simply because he has a preference, which he wouldn't have the right to if he were a heterosexual and married? Would that be fair? In a future video, I want to talk to you. See, I've written down a couple of the things I want to talk to you about. And one of them was going to be, we don't get everything we want. We Americans have almost come to the point of, if God allows anybody to have anything, then we all have the right to have it. And that's not so. In future videos, I will talk about what the Old Testament says versus what the New Testament says. In this case, it says the exact same thing. Depending on the version you're reading, it may be the exact same wording. And then I will tell you, and I know what I'm talking about, people who believe themselves to be homosexual and aren't. When I was on Stickum after live video closed down, got a young woman, I'm guessing 18, 19, 20 years old. Her parents pastored a United Pentecostal church. Never been on my program before. And people are rather anonymous. You don't have to use your name. You can make up one. And most of these networks, you can come on as a guest where no information about yourself is revealed. And even though it's public, it's very safe. And those of you that know me know that I'm very safe to be with. And on that network, I was known as Pastor Barbara. I had to go back to preach with parents because even though it's a real dumb name, I've been known by that for the last 8 years. A lot of people have no clue that I'm Barbara Shelton. This was before Facebook and Twitter, and believe me. But I was known as Pastor Barbara. She said, Pastor, I'm bisexual. I immediately knew she wasn't. I don't believe I knew because of any special revelation. I believe I knew just from common sense. From the fact that she said bisexual, I knew that there was an interest there in boys. And I know, listen, I used to teach 6th grade. Taught 6th grade for 8 years. During that time, a number of girls fell in love with their teacher. Yeah, for what, 6-8 weeks? When I taught 2nd grade for a couple of years, there were little boys that fell in love with their teacher. I know, listen, Satan's not stupid. He's got one job, and that's to make all of us fall. And I know that he is capable of reminding a girl that when she was in the 6th grade, she had feelings for her teacher. I figured that out right away. She had feelings for boys. Feelings, doing nothing. Interest, feelings for boys, because she was heterosexual. But like every girl, she had admired a woman and misunderstood what admiration is for somebody who's been kind to you or who is attractive. And I told her, honey, you're not bisexual. And I was going to explain the difference to her, and she said, would you pray for me anyway? And I did. And a couple months went by. The only other time in my life she ever came on my program was only twice that I know of. She may have come on, using another name that I didn't know. She said, it's all, never had a thought, never had an interest, never had a temptation, never crossed my mind again after you prayed for me. That was not a bisexual girl, but she thought she was. And there are all kinds of life situations, and an inexperienced youth has no clue. And Satan is always ready to sit on our shoulder and whisper things in our ear. You don't have to experiment to know the truth. But what you believe is your reality. Yeah. I live in the mountains. If a bear comes through your window, your blood pressure rises at least 30 or 40 degrees. When you see a bear coming in your window, coming at you, your body reacts in all kinds of ways. I got news for you. If you think you see a bear coming in your window, not coming in, but you think a bear is coming in your window, your blood pressure does the same thing. What you believe, what you perceive, as far as your mind and your body is concerned, is real. It doesn't have to be real for you to react. So, a lot of things I'll talk about in the future. But for right now, let me close by saying this. A homosexual act is two people of the same gender engaging in sex. a heterosexual act as two people of the opposite gender engaging in the same act. A heterosexual is a person, whether they're doing anything or not, whether they're 8 years old or 80, or somewhere in between, has a preference if they were to engage, it would be with somebody of the opposite sex. And a homosexual is a person that if, this can be a child, if they were to engage in an act, a homosexual has a preference. Listen, you're not responsible for your temptations if you don't act on them. If that were the case, you and I could not be saved. It would be an impossibility. Why? Jesus died on the cross, and because he never committed a sin, his death was in payment for our sins. If he had ever committed a sin, his death, this was before grace, this was Old Testament, he had not yet died and been resurrected and ascended into heaven. If Jesus had ever committed a sin, his death would have paid for his own sins, therefore not mine. And I couldn't be saved. And yet he was tempted 3 times by Satan after a 40-day fast. He was tempted to turn stones into bread, but he didn't. He was tempted, he didn't do it. He was tempted to jump down from a high place. He was tempted, he didn't do it. If a man or a woman is tempted to do something and doesn't do it, he hasn't committed a sin. A homosexual is not a person who engages in activity with the same sex. It's a person who, if they did, would prefer it be a person of the same sex. It's a preference. It's not an act. People can be in a homosexual act and be heterosexuals, like people in prison. People can be married and think they're satisfied because in those days that's what society expected and that's what people did. Then in later life they decide they're homosexuals. And yet they were happy. I don't want to go into a lot of inappropriate language, but you know what I'm talking about. There's all kinds of things I want to explain. But in the meantime, and in getting ready for me to get around teaching Romans 1, remember, it's a preference. It's only a sin when you do it. So let's be careful what language we use when we refer to other people. We may be calling Mother Teresa. I probably shouldn't have said that. And there's no way I can take that out of this. We may be referring to somebody who was celibate, who was many, many, many times closer to God than the people who are making jokes about that person. Do not confuse the word homosexual with the word homosexual act. Two different things. Keep that in mind. And hey, in a couple of weeks, join me when I'm preaching on first chapter of Romans. More on the subject. Are people born that way? Do people change? What makes people confused about who they really are? Can we do anything about it? That's coming up in the future. In the meantime, until my next video, blessings on you. And stay tuned.